You can close the door. Yeah. Good. All right. Welcome to class 89 of Faith and Calm. Tonight, I wanted to title this the topic, The Big Crocodile. We're getting rid of the crocodiles in your river. Why do I call it that? So you probably don't know the reference, but the Haftorah for this last Shabbos was the Haftorah of the prophet Ezekiel, Yehezkel. Oh, Yehezkel, yeah. And he's talking about, he compares, Haftorah is always connected to the Parsha. Parsha talks about Paroh. So he says that Paroh is like a big crocodile in the Nile, because the Nile was, of course, famous for its crocodiles and its hippopotamuses and other kinds of creatures,
Really?
Fish and other things that came in the Nile. Yeah, it still is. It's quite a very interesting thing. So anyway, we're going to talk about the very first. Somebody else came, Shlamishdus. Here we go.
Okay.
See what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and
Oh, hi. It's Seth.
As I saw, it's bad.
Right.
And so we're going to talk about, there was we're in the middle of the 10 plagues. It actually breaks it up into two parts for some reason, 7 and 3, in two parshas. And the Rebbe was very big on the plagues. The plagues were not just punishments for the Egyptians. The plagues were lessons, because as God told Moses, he said, Mani Ladush, that you should, I'm giving you these plagues in order that you, Paroh, should know that there is a God in the world. So they were actually instructions, they were demonstrations. Or another way to say it, which is also I like very much, they are what a good teacher knows. You don't just give a class and talk, you give also a physical demonstration. So God was showing to the Egyptians, not just telling them, but actually giving them some instructions by audio-visual instructions. The plagues were audio-visual instructions to explain that there is a God in the world. Now, what do you mean that this is an audio-visual instruction? So let's take the very first plague and let's look at it just a little bit. So the very first plague was the plague of blood, that the waters of the Nile turned to blood. Why? Could have been a lot of different other kinds of things. Why did God pick particularly that as the very first plague and the indication of it? So you should know a little bit about the Nile and about Egypt. Egypt is a desert country. If you look at most of the western part of Egypt, it's a very hot desert. Matter of fact, it's so hot that during the day, the scorpions cannot stand on the ground. It's so hot, they dance on 2 legs because it's just too hot. Egypt is just a bleak desert land. And if it wasn't for the Nile, there wouldn't be any life there at all. The Nile comes all the way from Africa. It's the longest river in the world. All right, some people think it's the Amazon, but it's at least 4,000 kilometers long. It's like the distance from Poland to New York. And it brings water from deep in Africa and floods that whole region, and brings mud and brings fish and brings, as I said, hippopotamus and crocodiles and all sorts of other kinds of stuff, vegetation, and it floods the land, brings very rich soil, and basically is the life of Egypt. And that's why they worshipped it, was because they viewed it as the source of their life. Everything came from the Nile, the papyrus, everything, water, everything that they drank. So the Nile was very, very important. Now, let's connect that with another idea. We know that when God sent Moses to talk to the Egyptians, the first thing Paroh did when Moses said, "Let my people go," and Paroh said, "Oh no, I'm not going to let them go. This is even before the first plague. I'm going to make it worse for them. They're going to have to get their straw, and they're going to have to harvest it themselves and make their own bricks and so forth." And the Jewish leaders were very, very upset at Moses, and they came to him and said, "You're killing us. You're destroying us in the eyes of Paroh. We're very mad at Moses." And the Ramban, 10th century, a famous commentator on the Chumash, says there's something here that's not quite understood. Part of the story. I mean, this is mean, why are they blaming Moses? Blame Paroh. Blame the Egyptians. I mean, he was trying to get you out, okay? All right, it's not turning out so well, so good. Okay, I understand that. But it's sort of like there's somebody who's trying to get you escape from Auschwitz, and you, instead of blaming the Nazis, you're blaming this guy. I mean, why are you blaming Moses? Things are so good. It's a concentration camp. Literally, Egypt was a concentration camp. They were killing the babies. It's a terrible situation, and anything that you can do to get us out, try. So why are they blaming Moses? So the Ramban tells us a very interesting insight into this whole idea of what was going on in Egypt at that time. Paroh, the king of Egypt, did not come out openly against the Jews. He did it very sneakily. He did it undercover. First, he said, you know what? We have a big project. We're going to build some pyramids. You're going to make a historic national effort, to do something major to put Egypt on the map. So everybody contribute money. That's what his first step was. And the Jews, you got to do that too. And then he said, it's not enough just to give money. I'm going to help build. And he put a sign on himself, and the containers for the mud and so forth. And he started working himself, and he said everybody else should pitch in. And so the Jews came and they pitched in too, because they felt they have to be part of the country. And so they started working, and then Paroh said, I'm not going to do this every day, but you guys keep going. And so the Jews then were part of the slave labor, the task to build the pyramids. But he didn't come out openly as a negative guy. He did it very cleverly. And even when he said to Shifra and Puah, to Yocheved and Miriam, said, kill the Jewish boys when they're born, he did that secretly. Nobody knew that was, his plot was that the Jewish boys should be killed on the birthing stools. And even when he said to all his people, he said, throw the Jewish boys in the river, he didn't come out openly for a couple of reasons. One, he was, people would get very upset. These are the Jews. They helped save the country in the time of Yosef. They could revolt. The Jews could revolt. So he did it secretly. He told them, you know what? Open season on Jewish boys, but don't tell anybody. If you happen to see a Jewish boy, you can just throw him in the Nile. And when people come and complain, ask them, hey, did you have witnesses? We'll hunt them down, tell the local police and we'll hunt that person down. Of course, there's no witnesses because this was all done at night. And so the Jewish boys were being thrown in, but there were no witnesses. So they did everything, smiling, pretending like, I like the Jews. I visit Israel every once in a while. And I even have some Jewish ministers on my staff and stuff like that. It was all deceptive. It was all fake. And the same thing with the Nile. The Nile was a big fake because the Nile looked like beautiful waters, blue waters. Everybody, appreciated them. And they were killing fields for Jewish kids. In other words, another way to say it is the Egyptians, they would sit by the river in their lounge chairs, playing Frisbee, all enjoying the wonderful, Egyptian sun, and playing by the river and, and listening to music and listening to Schopenhauer and stuff like that. And these blue waters all were lying. They were pretending like, it was a beautiful, wonderful, idyllic scene, but the truth of the matter was that these were places of killing fields of Jewish kids. So God said, you know what? You're going to know. Truth is going to come out. It takes time, but lies can't last forever. Big lies even also have to be exposed in the end, because the name of God is truth. And I'm going to show you that actually the river is full of blood. And that is what he did. He revealed the truth of Egypt. The truth of Egypt was that this was a river full of blood, Jewish blood. And that's what he did. And interestingly enough, the very last stage of the Jews leaving Egypt also had to do with a river splitting and also about the Egyptians drowning in it, because what goes around comes around. People who are hypocrites and liars and the big thieves of the world, who don't, not the petty thieves, but the ones in the government who cause all the trouble and so forth, the anti-Semitism. Eventually, God says, I will expose you and you will end up in the river. You will end up doing exactly what you did to others. It will come, what goes around comes around. So that's the first lesson. And that's the important lesson about the plagues, is just that there is a truth. They were drowned in the Yam Suf. Yes, we know. The Egyptians were drowned in the Red Sea, so they drowned too. And this is a part of the stages of what God does. The Alter Rebbe explains it, and he says, I don't know how many of you have ever made wine. Maybe not. I never did. But in wine, how do you know when wine is actually ready to be poured and tapped? So you put yeast in the wine, and it sediments and it goes down to the bottom, and those are called the lees. And when the lees all come together, all the junk is all on the bottom, it's not mixed up anymore, then you know that the wine is ready. And the same thing with silver. How do you know silver is ready? So it's when it's actually all the dross, all that stuff comes to the bottom and the silver is clear and you can see yourself. What is this about? This is the spiritual idea the Alter Rebbe explains about the plagues. That is that the final geula, the redemption, has to happen. And you think, that everything is getting better and better, but you're wondering, when is it going to finally be ready? And the answer is it's ready when all of the dirt starts coming out. And so we see in the world, that there's a lot of lies and a lot of dirt, and all of it's collecting together at the bottom. And it all seems like it's very powerful. But really what God is saying is this is really the beginning of the redemption. And it's in order for the redemption to happen, you have to get sometimes all that dirt out. And Rabbi I heard this from, had an interesting line. He said, there's a story of a guy recently, he and his wife decided for a month they were going to eat healthy. So they ate very, very healthy and only healthy foods. And after the month, decided to celebrate, and they went to a normal restaurant and they ate. And then he said, that night I felt terrible. I really felt awful. And the next day I went to the doctor and I said, was this the reward? It looked like I worked so hard to improve my health. And now I ate normal food and look at how I suffered. And he said, that's because you've refined your body now and it doesn't tolerate that dross and so forth. So the same thing with the universe right now. It's all the dirt comes out and we can't tolerate it anymore because we're more sensitized to it. And therefore, when we see things that are wrong, it feels worse to us. So that's the first lesson. Now, I wanted to connect this a little bit with there's going to be a big holiday next week, Yud Shvat, which is the day of the passing of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose picture I'm going to show here. And 1 year later, the Lubavitcher Rebbe took over. So screen share and picture. And there we go. Okay. So that's the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And as an introduction, I'm going to continue this next week, but I'm going to tell you a couple stories about his life, and then we're going to explain why this day is so special and what the lesson was that he taught us about this. But first, just a sort of an introduction to who he was and in his life. So the first story I'm going to tell you is about he looks very serious kind of guy. He was the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe before our Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and his father, he was his father-in-law, and he was born in Russia, Lubavitch, in the year 1880, and he passed away in New York in the year 1950. And he grew up. He was the only son of his father, the Rebbe Rashab, and so everybody knew that he was eventually going to become a Rebbe. And so he writes in his journal, he wrote a diary, and he writes very warm and very personally. And he explains, how he grew up and the stories about his life. And they're very, very interesting. And they're a pleasure to read because they're so personal and so revealing. And I'll just tell you a few of the stories that he said in there. The first story is when he was very young, just to give you a sense of how sensitive and delicate a child was, spiritually sensitive, but also sensitive emotionally. So this is a story when he was 9 years old. He was preparing for Passover, and he had got a new suit, had new shoes, and he was just being very careful for, to wear, not to get them at all dirty. And he was assigned the job of opening the bottles of wine beforehand because it's sort of tricky. It's a tricky procedure. You have to get the cork out, but would not get the metal touching the actual wine. And he was being extremely careful not to get his clothes dirty, and his father observed him. And his father gave him a little lesson, and he explained it as follows. He told his son, he said, Yosef Yitzhak, he said, you know, a prince who has a beautiful table with all sorts of delicacies, on it and so forth. But, and he eats at the meal, and the scraps he throws underneath the table to the dogs. And the dog has a wonderful delight and pleasure there. But if the prince actually goes down underneath the table and starts eating those food with the dogs, it's very disgusting. And he picked up on the message, and he realized that he was just putting too much effort, too much attention to his clothing. And he said for 3 weeks, he couldn't even look at his clothes. He was just so horrified at the fact that he had sunk to that level of thinking so much about his clothes and his shoes and the other kind of the other stuff. So you see, he was a delicate child, and but on the other hand, he was a fighter of unbelievable character. I'll tell you 2 stories. I think I got time for 2 stories of this. The first story is, let's move the illustration to that one. Here he is. He's about 9 years old. Now, the story behind this goes as follows. His father wanted him to learn Mishnayos. Now, Mishnayos, you should know, there's about 6,000 Mishnayos, and they're the foundation of the Gemara, and so it's very good to know them by heart. So he was memorizing by heart, and every time he memorized it, his father would give him some money. He eventually collected a pile of like 30 rubles, which is a fair amount of money. And his father said, now that you have this much money and you have nothing to spend it on because we take care of you with everything, why don't you make a free loan society? So he did, and he would loan it out. There happened to be one guy, he especially a very poor man. He was a butcher named Reb David. And Reb David, he was one of his regular customers for taking loans. He would take a loan, he would buy some cows, some lamb, etc., and he would then sell it. He would, he'd have it shechted, and he would cut it up, and he would sell it, and he would pay back the loan. And he needed money to buy the animals. So one day, little Yosef Yitzhak saw his friend David walking in the market with the way he paints it is just delicious. So Reb David was walking the market. He had a lamb on his shoulders. A little calf on his shoulders. He was leading a lamb, and he had a basket of chickens hanging around his neck. And as he was walking through the market, the deputy head of police of the town of Lubavitch saw him and started yelling and screaming and calling him a thief and hitting him. And little Yosef Yitzhak knew that David was not a thief, and he screamed at the policeman, and he jumped on him, and he said, "You evil man, why are you hitting David?" And the policeman was outraged, and he called his deputies, and he had Yosef Yitzhak thrown into a cell, a black, dark cell. And Yosef Yitzhak was sitting there, and he was debating with himself. Am I here because I was bad? Maybe I should fast today. Maybe I should be saying Anenu and Al Hate and so forth. And then he realized, no, I protected, I saved the fellow Jew. And so he decided to daven mincha with a lot of happiness. In the meantime, while he was praying in the pitch dark of the cell, he heard a low moaning sound, and it wasn't even a human sound. He was so scared. But he finished his prayers, and then afterwards he realized that he had a pack of matches in his pocket. So he took one out and he lit it, and he found out what it was. There was a calf in the cell, all tied up, and that was what was making the sounds. And he's saying, this is very strange. A few hours later, his uncle, who had a lot of connections with the police department, came, got him out of jail, and as he was being taken away, he said, I saw this calf there. I don't know what it was doing there. They told the head of the chief of police. He investigated, and he found out that the deputy policeman, the one who was hitting the shochet, was the one who was the thief, and he was stealing cattle, and he was keeping them in the jail cell because he was in charge of the jail cell, and he was in this whole attack on Reb David was just to deflect attention from him. So the head of the police had him thrown in jail and fired, and this was the first incarceration of maybe 7 of the Frierdiker Rebbe. I'm going to jump forward. I don't have enough time to tell this story, right?
It's a very beautiful story.
It's a beautiful story. Should I tell the story very quickly?
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is now, this is dealing later in the time of the czars. That he's about, the Frierdiker Rebbe is now in his early 20s, and it's a cute story. So his
Cute
father,
story.
yeah, his father
Amazing
told him,
story.
it's an amazing story too. His father, at this time, the czar was passing a lot of, there was already a lot of what they call maskilim, people who were no longer religious, were very involved in the Enlightenment movement, and they were trying to get all sorts of laws passed to crush Judaism, because they felt it was old-fashioned and needed to be wiped out. And if they can't personally do it, then they were going to get the czar and his ministers to help. So they had given a document to the Minister of the Interior saying that all rabbis have to go to university to become a rabbi in Russia, and they have to learn a lot of secular subjects there. And the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, was very opposed to this, and he sent his son to try and see what he could do to get the decree repealed. Yosef Yitzhak knew nothing about Moscow. What?
Because it was a plot to get these people to be non-religious.
Yes, it was a plot. You'd be first start with the rabbis and then the rest of the people. But anyway,
Can I interrupt? Who is the one who made this decree?
The decree hadn't happened yet, but it was written up by Maskilim about the enlightened,
Maskilim.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
It was something that was so like when they went to these secular universities, and they taught them all about that. There's no such thing as God. There's no such, it was.
It's like today.
It's like college today, probably.
Yeah.
And it pulled these young people away from their Yiddishkeit, and that was the plan. That was why there was a decree that they all had to go to university. The plan was not to get them to be more educated, but to rip Yiddishkeit away from them, rip Judaism away from them.
So here comes this guy from the little town of Lubavitch. He comes to the big city of Leningrad, Petersburg, to try and find it out. He doesn't know anything, but they had some contacts. They had a big donor named Baron Ginsburg. And he said to them, you know what? You're never going to see the Minister of Interior. He's very difficult to get a hold of and to change anything. But maybe here's one way to get to him. He has an old teacher that from his youth, who he really adored very much. And he lives not far from here. Let's go see him and talk to him. And maybe he has a way of talking to his former students. So they both go, Baron Ginsburg and the Frierdiker Rebbe, and they start having a conversation. And this guy was an elderly man, but very interested in all sorts of different subjects. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was well-versed in many different topics and subjects, and he liked talking to him. Talked about science and astronomy and other subjects, and he really enjoyed having somebody who was interesting and talk to. And he said, keep coming back to me. So the Frierdiker Rebbe kept coming, and for a short period of many days, he did this. And after he saw that they were developing a connection, the Frierdiker Rebbe started to cry. And this teacher said, what's the problem? And he says, listen, I have a big problem. Your former student, Stolypin, he has a decree on his desk, which he's threatening to sign, which will eventually cause the destruction of Soviet Jewry. And I want to stop him. And the teacher says, I would love to help, but the relationship between me and my former student is not good, because he's turned into a very evil man. And we had some arguments, and he's really not speaking to me anymore. And but maybe this would help. I have a permit, a piece of paper that lets me go in to the interior, the interior ministry anytime I want. I will give you that document. Don't tell anybody where it's from. And if you get caught, deny everything. But that will at least get you into the building. From what you do from there, that's up to you. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, okay. He took the document. He went to the interior building. He didn't even know where to go. But, he walks in, and he comes in dressed as a chassid. And the guards are going, what is this guy doing here? But he's got the right documents. So in Russia, if you have the right documents, you can get in wherever you want. So he walks right into the front door. And this is also nobody wanted to go into that place because that was also where the Tsar's secret police were also. But he's wandering around the floors there. He finds out that the minister's office on the 4th floor. He goes to the 4th floor and realizes it's probably the big office at the end. And as he walks to the end of the corridor, past all these doors, he sees a very elegantly dressed man walk out of the end office. And he leaves the door open. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe feels, the Frierdiker Rebbe feels, hey, this is my opportunity. So before he comes back, he goes into his office and he starts looking through on the desk and he sees 2 piles of papers. One of them is an in basket and the other is the out. He starts looking through the in basket and he looks through and he finds the actual decree and it's not been approved yet. So he sneaks into the desk, he grabs the stamp, as you can see in the picture, and one of the stamps says approved, the other one says rejected. He takes the rejected stamp, smashes it onto the document, takes the document, puts it into the out bin in the middle of the out bin, and then he walks out. And it worked. That was it. That was the end of the decree.
And he would have paid for his.
And he would have been killed if he'd been caught, absolutely killed, if they hadn't even caught him. Can I tell one more story? It's late?
Yeah, maybe do it next week.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we'll continue with the stories next time. What I wanted to show you was, basically it's like same as the connection between these two is, and so forth. There are crocodiles in life. The crocodiles hiding in the Nile, there's crocodiles in the river, there's crocodiles in our lives and scary things and stuff like that. And I think the combination of what the Frierdiker Rebbe said and what we saw here was there is a God in charge and truth does come out. And sometimes it comes out in miraculous ways. And sometimes you have to go beyond what the letter of the law is. And you really extend yourself. But God sees that energy, that effort that one puts into it, to be connected with God, to do the right thing, even though it's not necessarily, altogether is, that's what Moses did. He stood up again and again and again to Paroh and told him, this is the truth. I don't care how big and how powerful your country is. I don't care how big and powerful the Tsar is. I don't care how much secret officers you have. I don't really care about anything. Truth will come out. Sooner or later, there is a judge over this world and he makes the truth come out. And I think this is also part of our mission here in this world is not necessarily to take the easy path into, because nothing really happens that way. But with deliberation, with common sense, sometimes it's going beyond ourselves. So that's what I wanted to say.
Can you put yourself?
Can I put myself back? Yeah, I do the stop share.
Thank you, Yechezkel Shimon.
And we'll continue with class number 89. Okay.
Wait.
To be continued.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yesher Koach.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Good to
Shalamis.
say, Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Sometime, Beth, you should tell some of your stories from your early days in Boston. How you overturned worlds over here.
Is it snowing there?
Is it snowing here? It has snowed a little bit. It's not snowing right now, but it has
Not yet.
snowed already a tiny bit. Yeah. So anyway, okay. Does anybody want to say something first?
Hello.
Okay,
Nice to see you.
So I guess the mini title of my session would be, you might as well be optimistic because you just can't tell. You can't tell what's going to happen in life, with all our intelligence, with everything that we know, you can't tell what's going to happen. You just, no matter how bad things look, you just can't tell what's going to happen. So I'm going to start out, I say these 4 things, I'm going to continue to say them. Number 1, the things that we have to remember every time is that at all times that we're in an extraordinary time. How do we know that? Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe told us that it is an extraordinary time, that the the redemption of the Jewish people and the world is unfolding. I'll turn this off. And okay, it's unfolding. And the Rebbe also told us in many allusions to himself that he is Mashiach, and that and that the grave will have no dominion over him. So, so we also know that our souls were handpicked to be here at this time. We know that we were given all the tools we need to function at this time. We were given the Torah, which is our guidebook, mitzvahs, which are our power tools, and leaders like the Rebbe. And we know that tonight we are actively furthering the cause of the redemption. So I'm going to take a little sip of water. So, so last week, if anybody missed last week I think was a very pivotal class, and it was on Tracht gut wird sein gut. Think good and it will be good. And we discussed why such a thing should work. And we discussed the difference between emuna and bitachon. And we said that emuna is a faith. What is, belief, faith. What is that? That's the general feeling that a Jew possesses when they're in the right minds, that you know what, Hashem is in charge, so whatever is happening is good. And whether I see it or not, whatever is happening is good, and it's good for me, it's good for the world. There's a much more difficult thing to attain, which is called bitachon. Bitachon is, I actively trust you, God, that this situation is going to be palpably good. I'm going to see the good in it. And we're told, why does bitachon work? What is it? Is it a magical formula? No, it's not a magical formula. The Rebbe explains that bitachon works because bitachon is very, very, very difficult to achieve. And if you achieve it, if you achieve active trust that I'm going to see your benevolent hand in this, God, then Hashem pays you back for your trust with benevolent good, with apparent good. And so anyway, so as I said, tonight, I want to tell two stories about, and as I called it, yeah, you might as well be optimistic because you just can't tell what will happen. So there was an outreach rabbi, and he was going to do a seminar in Israel, and so he was waiting in an airport for the flight to Israel, from America to Israel. And you know, those are usually big flights, and there were a lot of people there. And what do religious Jews who are waiting for a flight, what do? In the airport, they very often congregate and have a minyan, have a prayer service right at the gate, because there's so many of them there, and they know that on the plane itself, you know, the stewardesses, the stewards, they don't look too fondly on making a minyan in the aisle, so it's better to do it in the airport. So if they can have a service before the flight, they'll do it. And so there they were, and they were having a big, you know, they decided, minyan, let's do it. You know, we still have a few minutes before the plane takes off. So they had
where was this?
I don't know which airport, some big airport in America. And so they're having a minyan. But then as they're having the minyan, there's an announcement. Okay, we're ready to board group one. And there they are in the minyan. So all the guys are like rushing through their davening, just rushing, saying those words, boogieing, because they don't want to miss the flight. And they all get in line, and everything is fine. But this rabbi notices that there's a woman, a younger woman, and she apparently was, you know, if you're going to daven, it's nice to daven with a minyan, because you can say certain things with a minyan that you can't say when you're on your own. So she had been davening with a minyan, and she's not rushing. She's just saying her stuff. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, she's not worried. She's going to miss the flight. And he's standing in line. He's getting closer and closer to getting on the plane, and he's looking at her in amazement. She is not rushing at all. What is with this woman. You know, it's an international flight. Very few people buy refundable tickets anymore because they're astronomical. And if you miss an international flight, it's a mess. All the people waiting for you, your plans, your everything's such a big mess. He can't get over her peace of mind. He can't get over her devotion to her prayer. He never saw anything like this. And he gets on the plane, and she's still davening. The doors close, and they taxi down the runway. And as they're taxiing down the runway, as they're taxiing down the runway, all of a sudden there's a smell of smoke in the plane, and they don't know what it is. And the pilot announces, "We're going back to the gate. We're going to," whatever they call it, deboard, whatever verb they have for that. "We're going to deplane because there's something wrong that has to be checked out." So they go back to the gate. Everybody gets off. She's still davening. Everybody gets off. They find out it was not a significant problem whatsoever. And she's now ready. And everybody gets onto the plane, including her. So he can't take it anymore. He walks over to her and he says, "I'm sorry, I just have to say something. I never saw such devotion in my life. I mean, you got paid back. You're getting on the flight. You didn't have to rush." And he said, "But can you tell me, how were you so calm that whole time?" And she said, listen, my friend, Mr. Rabbi," she said, "I've been single for quite a while. And I just decided I want to do something special. I want to do something special for God. And I want to do something special with my life. I don't have kids right now. I'm not married right now. I want to do something special." And she said, "And I decided a while ago that special thing would be my prayer, that when I pray to God, I am nowhere else. I am only with God. I am only with the words that I'm saying, and I pay attention to nothing else." She said, "So that's why I did it." And she goes to sit down, and he sits in his place. But whenever you're overcome with something, you've just seen something you've never seen before, it's like brewing in you, and you have to talk about it. So the steward comes over and make sure that they're all buckled in and stuff. And at some point in the beginning of the flight, he says to the steward, you won't believe what happened in the airport." And he tells him the whole thing, and he says, "Yeah, that girl is amazing. It's just the most amazing. I never saw devotion like that in my life." The steward is not a religious. He's an Israeli, a young Israeli, but he's not religious. He also never heard of anybody being so dedicated to anything. He said, "What can make a person so dedicated?" He was so shocked. So since the rabbi was an outreach rabbi, it's his thing to talk to people who don't have such extensive knowledge about Judaism. He used that as an opening, and he talked to the steward about Judaism, about his faith, about what it means to be a Jew for the rest of the flight. By the time the international flight was over, the steward was convinced, and he went to he enrolled in a yeshiva for men who didn't learn Judaism when they were little. So that woman's davening was responsible for a Jew becoming reacquainted with his faith. So the guy spends a year in yeshiva, and at the end of the year, he marries the girl. Is that incredible?
I was just going to say, did she get married? But I didn't know it was going to be to him.
Marries her. So not only with her davening, she looked like she doesn't care about whatever's happening in this world. Looks like she's ruining her little situation. She's ruining the thing. She's not getting on the flight. What did she do? She caused her husband she needed him to be frum. She caused him to go to yeshiva, and then she got him. And it's an incredible story. She looks like she's ruining her life, but by doing something, not making calculations, just doing what you think Hashem would like you to do in that moment, she ended up scoring big time. So
That's
anyway,
a wonderful story. Where did you hear that?
This story I heard on it's from a book. I have to get the name of the book for you. I had it written down, and I don't have it right here. I'll get, God willing, I'll get the name of the book. I heard it through. I heard it in this class that I take from this Hasidic lady, Mindy Feldman. She referred to this book, and it's a story in.
It's a wonderful story. Yeah. Very inspiring. Thank you.
So the next thing I want to talk about is a story about a story that took place in World War II. And now you'd think that, both my parents were in the war. They were both survivors. They both went through heaven and the opposite of heaven. They went through the opposite of heaven very much. And I know a lot about the war, but I didn't know anything about this particular segment of the war. I knew all this. I'd heard that the Jews in Israel were also in trouble, that the Nazis also wanted to get them. There was a plan. And then for some reason, the Nazis turned around right before they got to Israel. But I just read about the plan, and it's just amazing. It's an amazing story that also proves you might as well be optimistic, because you just can't tell what's going to happen. So this story, begins on June 30th, 1942. June 30th, 1942. Let me bring up a map. I had no idea how extensive the conquest that the Nazis had made was. I had no idea. I knew that they took over Poland and all that kind of stuff. Let's see, where is the, I don't know where it is. I don't see where it is. Where's desktop? Okay, is it here? Must be here. Okay, here, let me pull this up. Here, over here. Okay, can you see this map? Yes, can you see the map? Can you
No.
see the map? No map? Oh.
No.
Fine. Okay, let's get rid of it. Why can't I see the map? I want to share my desktop, and it's somehow not an option. Okay, let me try one more time. Here. Oh, good. Now it's an option because I opened it up. Okay. And now you're going to see it. Yes, you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is a map of how extensive the Nazi success was. Here is Germany in dark red. There's Poland. I knew they took over Poland, but I didn't know they had, look at all the countries down through here, all the way into, creeping into Russia. France, we know they took over, but I didn't know all this part of Africa the Nazis had taken over. Did you know that? Algeria, Libya, Morocco, south of there.
I did, because my father was, I thought that they were trying to go in that direction. I didn't know they succeeded, because my father, that was where he was in North Africa during that war. But
so there they were. The plan was to take over the world, and it was they were they were moving on with their objective with great success. So, okay, I'm going to stop the share. They were moving on with tremendous success. And
thank you for showing that. I didn't.
It's amazing how extensive their success was, and there was. Okay, so at this point, they were poised right before Egypt, and the end of all the Jews in Israel was almost a done deal. They had made a deal with the Arabs. They're going to, I don't know which Arabs, but they were going to march through, they were going to take over Egypt. And then they were going to take over Israel, and they were going to build concentration camps in Israel with the help of the Arabs, and get rid of all the Jews in Israel with concentration camps, just like they had in Israel. There was no hope there was no real hope. There was for the Jews. The British Army, who were the defenders of Israel and the defenders of that area, were a joke at that point. They were a joke. And the Germans were a well-oiled, disciplined army, a well-disciplined machine, war machine. And they were unstoppable. What are you going to do? And they had a plan. In a few days, they figured it's going to take them a couple of days to take over Egypt, because the British Army was so poorly run At that point, it'll take a couple, and they know what they're doing, the Germans. It's going to take a couple of days. They're going to be in Israel. Israel has no defenses. That's going to be it for all the Jews. So what weapon do the Jews have? Do you know what weapon Torah says we have? The best weapon a Jew has? Anybody know?
Bitachon
Yes, and prayer. That's
and prayer.
called the Jews' weapon. And so what did the Jews do? It was June 30th, 1942, the 15th of Tammuz, 1942. And they got the bad news then that the Germans were on the border of Egypt, ready to take over Egypt and just roll into Israel. So what did they do? It happened to be the yard site of a very big tzaddik called the Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim lived more than 300 years earlier. He had already passed away a long time ago, but he was a tremendous, tremendous tzaddik. There are stories that the Baal Shem Tov told that the Baal Shem Tov said that the Baal Shem Tov had part of the soul of Mashiach, and the Or HaChaim had the other part of the soul of Mashiach. And if they ever got together, then Mashiach would be there. But they were never successful in getting together. Anyway, the Or HaChaim was in Israel. He was buried on the Mount of Olives. And so what did the Jews do? They knew there was a tremendous tzaddik, the Or HaChaim, buried there. 20,000 Jews came to the gravesite of the Or HaChaim, and they davened there for a miracle. They had no hope except for Hashem. And the rabbis told everybody, fast and daven, and that's what they did. And everybody was there. Jews of all stripes were there. And there was a Rebbe there. He was called, I never heard of him before, he was called the Huziatiner Rebbe of Yerushalayim. He was a big Rebbe, and he was a grandchild of a famous Rebbe called the Ruzhiner Rebbe. And he was there together with the Shviller Rebbe. We have a Shviller Rebbe right around the corner. And as I said, 20,000 Jews of all stripes. And there they are at the gravesite of the Or HaChaim, and they're begging for a miracle. And there's another guy, a chassid. He wasn't a Huzatinner chassid. He was a chassid of another group. His name was Rabbi Beryl Ludmir. And he was standing right near the Huziatiner Rebbe. And he's noticing that when everybody's davening, the Huziatiner Rebbe is staring intently at the gravestone of the Or HaChaim, just staring. And at a certain point, the Huziatiner Rebbe looks up and he says, "It's going to be good." And afterwards, he explained to this chassid, why did he say it's going to be good? Because when everybody was davening, he was looking at the grave, and he saw, I don't see these things, but he's a great Rebbe. He saw the 4 letters of Hashem's name floating in the air above the grave. And he thought, Hashem is giving me a sign. It's going to be good. And he had another reason for optimism, because shortly before then, he had been learning Torah, and he read a commentary that was written hundreds of years ago about Yaakov. You know, remember, there's a scene when Yaakov, is wrestling with an angel. And there was he was learning, the Huziatiner Rebbe was learning this commentary by the Or HaChaim on that particular struggle. And what did the Or HaChaim say? You remember right after that wrestling match, the angel that he's wrestling, that Jacob is wrestling with, tells him, you know, in the future, shortly, your name is going to be changed. You will no longer be called Yaakov, Jacob. You're going to be called Yisroel, Israel. That's what you're going to be called. And the 300 years earlier, the Or HaChaim explained that if at that point, if Yaakov is called Yaakov, Jacob, he's going to be killed by Rommel. But if he is called Yisroel, then Rommel will not be able to destroy him, and the Jews will win. Rommel. So he figures, okay, this Huziatiner Rebbe says this was written more than 300 years ago. Probably Rommel is referring to Rome. But Rommel happens to be the name of the German general who's poised to destroy Israel. So as long as we are Israel, we're doing our thing, we're dominating to Hashem, we're remembering who's in control of the world, we are going to win.
That was the campaign that my father was in for 3 years in North Africa to support the effort to push him back.
Incredible. So listen to what happens. So Rommel, this general Rommel, he's poised to attack Egypt on that day because it's the full moon. And what they would do is they would attack in the full moon because they were very skilled. All they needed is the light of the moon, and they would make a surprise attack and decimate the local army. And he was like, he figured a few hours, Egypt is finished. What happens as they're poised to march into Egypt by moonlight? All of a sudden, a tremendous sandstorm comes whipping through Egypt, and all the sand is in the air, and it's going to ruin all the Germans' equipment. It's a horrible, horrible sandstorm.
Oh my God.
He gets in touch with the German whose name I don't like to even say, the head of the whole Nazi thing. And he says, we have to cancel, we have to pull back. And the head says, Germans do not pull back, we only go forward. The German army must always continue forward. This Rommel was smarter than the other one. He didn't do it. He flew to Germany, and he convinced the big shot that this is not going to work. We can't fight in a sandstorm. But by the time he got back to Egypt, it was 3 days later. There was no longer a full moon. The moon wasn't strong enough, and they couldn't. It didn't make sense. They wouldn't have enough light to do their usual technique. So he pulled it up, pushed. So Rommel pushed it off for a month. He figured we're going to do it in a month. The next month came, July. What happened? It's rainy. It's never rainy in Israel or in that area. It's rainy clouds every single night, and he has to push it off for another month. By a couple of months later, everything was a mess. His army was not in control anymore, and the British got a good general. His name was General Montgomery. You know, Heskelshimmer knows this cold. It's amazing. He knows World War II history cold. And what happened? This British General Montgomery led the British troops, and they successfully stopped Rommel in his tracks. After that, Germany just topples. It takes 3 years until the complete toppling in 1945, when the German commander of all the German forces, William Keitel, he's the one who formally surrendered for the Germans in 1945. He personally signed the surrender papers, and he was interviewed in court. He testified in court. He said, "You know what? The last good day we had, the end of our success, the time when our success started plummeting, was June 30th, 1942. From then on, it was a disaster. June 30th, 1942 was when 20,000 Jews got together and davened for the success that Hashem should save them in a miracle. And so so by logic, there were no chances for the Jews. By logic, nothing should have happened. Nothing. It should have been the end of the entire Jewish people in Europe and in Israel, and or a vast amount of the Jewish people. They were facing an unstoppable war machine, but you know what? You might as well be optimistic, because you just can't tell what Hashem's going to do, no matter what the odds are. So it's 7:58. I'm going to stop the recording, and if anybody has any questions, I would love to